I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On tonight's episode, we will discuss the Gators losing out on a couple of major targets on the recruiting trail. Athlon selects a few Gators on their preseason All-SEC team. Homecoming date is set, and we'll wrap up by going through key games on the 2022 SEC schedule. We'll jump into two bits here in a minute, but how's it going, man?
Oh, man, it's going really well. I'm, recovered from all the magazine writing that we were doing. We've had people reach out to us. Yes, we realize there's some typos in there. We'll go back and fix those as we go. First run on this, and I think we've learned some lessons. But appreciate everybody reaching out, all the help, and getting ready to ramp up for sort of the stretch run into the season in the fall. So hopefully some articles coming pretty soon. I was telling you before we came on, I got 3 that are like 75% complete. So, getting those to 100% completion, getting them up there, both on YouTube and the website, is priority over the next week or two. And hopefully people enjoy them.
Yeah, that's it. I am just feeling recovered from all the magazine stuff as well. And, looking ahead here toward the season, getting to the middle of June here. Let's start with 2 bits tonight, Will. We're going to jump right in. I'm a little fired up on this topic tonight. Yeah, we're sitting here in mid-June, and it's essentially an information wasteland on the calendar prior to any upcoming season. This is kind of a time where everybody gets a little bit of a break. I know there's some visits going on, but we're starved for any new level of information. And outside of recruiting, there hasn't been a ton of new levels of information here. So when you get 2 pieces of news that don't break in your direction, it's easy to feel a certain way. And that happened for the Gators this week. Billy Napier and company suffered a couple of major head-to-head losses on the recruiting trail. 5-star cornerback A.J. Harris out of Alabama has announced his intent to commit to Georgia. And 4-star linebacker out of IMG, Jordan Hall, is headed to the Big Ten to play for, not Ohio State, not Penn State, not Michigan, but Michigan State. Michigan State here. So Will and I, we pride ourselves on attempting to offer level-headed analysis surrounding Florida football. And by all means, I do understand that losing out on 2 recruits is not a reason to fully panic in the grand scheme of things. And Florida is very much in the hunt with several other upper echelon prospects. Cormani McClain, Malik Bryant, Peyton Kirkland, Trayon Webb, Will Norman all come to mind. Plenty of great players out there still. But let's set aside some of that level-headed nature for a minute, Will. Let's indulge in a moment of frustration and ask, what in the hell is going on here? What is going on? There was a ton of confidence surrounding Harris to the Gators, and the dude not only doesn't end up at UF, but intends to sign with your biggest rival. That one hurts. Just going to say it. That hurts. Jordan Hall just gave a rave review this past weekend about a campus visit, June 6th. It was campus visit June 6th, saying, Jay Bateman has done a really good job recruiting me. We talk frequently, and that's a big part of my recruitment here. It's nice to hear nice things. It's nice to be featured on so many pretty graphics on Twitter. But why has all of this praise been so slow to convert into commits, Will? Do you think that players are waiting to see how Florida looks on the field this year? Is the NIL space a factor? Or do we just need to practice a little more patience as a fan base in general and not feel so frustrated? I granted, this is a moment in time right now, right? Slow news cycle right now. 2 big losses on the recruiting trail, and it really feels like Florida needs a win right now because it's been a minute, and you're looking to build this class. You talk about the bump class. We've hyped it up. We've been as pro Billy Napier as anyone to this point. Will, what's going on? How are you feeling about all this?
I mean, it's not ideal, right? I mean, if it was ideal, we'd have these guys committed and we'd have a class of 15 guys and there'd be 4 or 5 stars. And, Nick Saban would be complaining about how Napier's buying players. And that would probably be ideal. That's obviously not where we're at. I think there are a couple of things is that, the panic button is September 1st. Like, that's when you look at the class and go, this is what it's going to be from a quality perspective. And if they're up in the 92 or 93 range for their average player ranking, I think we'll be very happy in September. And so a lot of the guys that you mentioned are people that we need to watch, and he's going to have to start getting some of these guys, right? But it's not time to panic yet. at the same time, yeah, it hurts, especially when you lose that to a place like Michigan State. That's it. It ain't Ohio State. I get Mel Tucker just signed a giant deal there, but Florida needs to be beating Michigan State in head-to-head recruiting battles. The one with Harris hurts a little bit less. I mean, that was one where we thought he might come to Florida, but you've also got McLean and then Tony Mitchell, who's also a 5-star, who's pretty warm on the Florida board there as well. The issue with Harris is you sit there and you go, hey, look, Raymond is the guy who we're sitting there going, this is the guy who's going to bring these elite 5-star recruits to Gainesville at the quarterback position. At the cornerback position, that's going to have to start to transfer. But again, there's still cornerbacks on the board. And in fact, I think when you look at Florida's recruiting class, one of the things we can talk about from a patient's perspective is the two positions that I think they have to hit on this particular cycle, and where I think you can see them take lower level guys, is linebacker and then offensive guard or interior offensive line, because of the guys who are leaving, right? You got Ventrell Miller, Amari Burney, you got David Reese, who's probably going to be gone. You've got DeJuan Black, who I'm not entirely sure how COVID fits in with his eligibility, but he could conceivably be gone after the year. If Derek Wingo has a good year, what that means with you've got Chief Border, Scooby Williams, and Shamar James as the only linebackers on the roster. So you're going to have to replace not only just quality, but depth at the linebacker position. The same thing's true at interior offensive line, where Ethan White and Osiris Torrance are probably going to be gone if they have good years. And then who do you have behind that? And not a whole lot, to be honest. So, Napier's dealing with some depth issues, and that means he's going to have to save a couple of spots probably for some lower ranked guys. But the reality is guys like McLean, guys like Tony Mitchell, guys like Richard Young, guys like Cedric Baxter, guys like Malik Bryant, guys like Derek LeBlanc, those are all guys who are going to have to start committing to Florida and commit to Florida soon. Now, look, I mean, guy like Treyon Webb, he's a legacy. Everything has him leaning towards Florida. But part of the frustration is that you sit there and look at that and go, that guy should be committed. Right? It's not this, well, right, we know he's going to commit eventually. It's he should be committed. We want him to be helping recruit guys to Florida. But again, very, very early. These are, this is something where if we had 10 3-star guys signed or committed and we were missing out on these guys, I'd go, okay, now it's time to start pushing the panic button. But with only 5 commits, they've got some spaces open. And like you said, NIL's a little bit different. They're going to be waiting. I'm assuming you've been telling me this for a while now, that guys are going to wait longer to sign because essentially it's a negotiation, right? And if you commit and then people stop swooping in with better offers, what was the point? You think about the way these collective bargaining agreements work with like the NFL and the Major League Baseball, where nothing gets done until the deadline. And I do wonder whether we're going to see some of that type of stuff go on in college football, where, nothing is going to get done until you finally get to that early signing day in December, just because there's not any incentive to do so, right? No one's going to up their offer it's like eBay, right? You want to bid right at the last second so that nobody else can get a bid in, as opposed to bidding, 4 days before the auction's up, and then everybody else can overbid your bid. So I think there's a little bit of that going on. I think some of it is worrisome, right? I mean, you sit here and say, these are priorities. These are guys Napier wanted, and they're going someplace else. And one of them to a major rival. It's a problem, right? You cannot lose those battles consistently. Now, they've only lost 1 or 2 in this case. And if you bring in Cormani McLean and you bring in Tony Mitchell and Georgia gets Harris, okay. Like you have filled those spots with high quality players. And I don't think, even if Harris turns into a star, I don't think you sit there and go, oh, whiff. I think you go, we got 2 of the 3 5-star cornerbacks on our board. But that's the problem, right? Is you missed that first one, which means now you need to hit on the other 2. That's what we'll see coming forward. Can they do that?
Well, and there was more confidence around Harris than there has been. Mitchell's been more of an Alabama lean. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, right?
Well, it depends. These, the reality is that except for until someone commits, the leans and all that stuff don't mean a whole lot. And, if you think about it, right?
Sure, but Mitchell is an Alabama kid, though.
Sure,
he's from Alabama, so that is going to be tough to pull a kid out of Alabama in general. That's not like, I wouldn't just assume that we have a kid from Alabama in the bag on that, right? Whereas McLean, I put a little more stock into the McLean thing. McLean's a Lakeland kid. Florida's had a ton of success in that area in the past, and we're up and running strong as a program. We do recruit really well in that area. I do put more stock in the McLean. If we miss on him, that would be a bigger loss, in my opinion, than losing on Mitchell or Harris. But I guess the point is, you're looking at it here. maybe this is just a fan. And again, I think I'm maybe reflecting what part of the fan base is feeling right now. People are a little bit starved for a win on the recruiting trail. We've been getting knocked on recruiting for years now, and we hired the coach to fix the problem. There's a lot of positive comments coming out, a lot of nice things being said. Oh, the coaches are on top of it. They're very organized and everything. We've said it all too, but until the results start coming in, there's going to be this little bit of angst amongst the fan base. I think it's fair for the fans to feel that way too.
As there should be. I mean,
Yes.
Napier came in and he said, this is a talent acquisition business. And if I can't get 25 high quality guys who can come out and play for the University of Florida, then I don't deserve to be here. And I think the fans agree with him on that. And not that he doesn't deserve to be there, but that they agree that this is a talent acquisition business. And he's going to have to bring in 25 high level players to come in and fill the roster. Look, he's got until September in my book, right? And that's not because the recruiting season ends in September. It's because all the data that I've looked at suggests there's a lot of variation, because 1 5-star makes somebody go shooting way up the charts, and a couple of 3-stars drag people down when you've only got 4 or 5 commits. By the time you get to September, though, you've usually got 12, 13, 14 commits. A lot of the 5-stars are off the board, which means there's not a whole lot of moving around. Everything smooths out. So we will know September 1st. And so we're only 2.5 months away from doing that. So while I understand the angst, and while I feel it too, right? I would love to have.
Yeah. Well, I said indulge for a moment, man. Indulge.
Well, you're the one yelling, so I got to talk some sense into you. But look, I mean, everybody is well within their rights to feel some angst. The thing is, you can't do anything about it. And we've got a bunch of guys in the next few weeks who are going to be announcing. And when those guys announce, we'll either be really, really anxious or we'll be crowing, right? And so I don't know that it's time to like flog Billy Napier or flog the staff at this point. And the other thing is that the process is not always going to deliver every single result that you want. No recruiting class should be evaluated over 1 player or even 2 players or 3 players. If your recruiting class falls apart, if 1 or 2 players don't come, then that was a crappy recruiting class. Your recruiting class needs to be the amalgam of everybody that you bring together and say, this is a solid recruiting class because of this and this and this. So you need top end talent, but then you need depth. And then you need developmental prospects, and you need guys who fill needs. And so you look at all 4 of those things when you're doing that. So when I look at the 5 guys they've already got committed, 2 of them are offensive linemen, and that is a definitive need. There are no linebackers, though. And so if you start looking at positional need, they're going to need to fill those linebacker positions, because that is a spot they need to fill. You look at where they are with the quarterback position. They're going to need a quarterback. So Jaden Rashada is somebody who's going to be committing relatively soon, but did push his recruitment back a little bit. It's interesting when you look at his list. He's got a bunch of schools I wouldn't be really worried about, and then Texas A&M. And so, sliced bread, maybe making sure Rashada goes to College Station. And that's one that you figure Napier really doesn't want to miss on, and probably can't miss on if Rashada turns out to be a special player.
Miami and Oregon are in the mix too.
Yeah, but from a money perspective, like an NIL perspective, the bully is A&M. There was a really good tweet a couple of weeks ago by Bud Davis where he sort of showed the size of the war chest based on boosters and then athletic revenue and profitability, and A&M just outpaced everybody. And Oregon and LSU and those teams were sort of in the same general area as Florida. Mm-hmm. So when you think about NIL, how that impacts recruiting, if Napier's really as good a recruiter as everybody thought he was coming in, those are some battles he's going to have to win. And look, there's going to be playing time at Florida if you're a quarterback and a high level quarterback. So I think everything is there to be able to sell somebody on that. But
sorry, go ahead, Will.
No, I was just going to say, wait till September, man.
Do we have to give Napier some room to deal with this NIL stuff, just like anyone else? Like what worked for him, and the people who say Billy's coming up from the Sun Belt, he has, is the SEC now. He's recruited in the SEC. He's recruited for Alabama. He's gotten some big time receivers out of the state of Florida to go play for Alabama. The man knows how to recruit on an SEC level, no doubt. But it is a different ball game. I mean, then that's why we're seeing Nick Saban whine about it this offseason too, because probably the old tactics aren't working, and there's some adjustment period there. So what worked for Billy at Alabama, and maybe even to some extent at ULL, a little bit of an adjustment here as the head coach of the Florida Gators.
He gets 2.5 months. He gets till September. Like, that is the reality, is that we know what it takes to win in the SEC. over and over and over again. We told, to anybody I could tell, I was looking at Mullen's recruiting saying, this isn't going to be good enough. You might come up and snipe Georgia every once in a while, but you're going to consistently be the Auburn of the SEC East. And that's exactly what's happened, right? You have one bad year, you have a couple of pretty good years, but can't get over the Georgia hump. You get over the Georgia hump once, but you weren't quite good enough to beat Alabama and even an LSU team that you should have beat. Here's the reality. Billy Napier's getting paid $52 million over the next 7 years to coach Florida Gators. Billy Napier negotiated all of the staff that was necessary, that he said was necessary for this talent acquisition business. Billy Napier has the Gator Collective and the Gator Guard going out there and getting him significant NIL funds to compete with all these other groups out there. There's nothing that Florida is not giving the coach in terms of what he said. In fact, he even turned down the Auburn job allegedly and didn't want the LSU job because this is the one that he thought he could win big at. So that's the expectation. I'm sorry, no one's going to feel sorry for Kirby Smart if he puts up 3 straight recruiting classes in the 12s. In fact, the Georgia Bulldog fans are going to start calling for his head if that happens, and they should, because the expectation in the SEC when you get paid this much at a big time school is that you're going to recruit at a big time level. So no, I don't think Florida fans need to give anybody any grace. I think your job is to figure this stuff out. You're being paid as a CEO. NIL has been on the horizon for a significant amount of time. You have someone that you've hired under your staff specifically to deal with NIL. And so, yeah, there's a little bit of information asymmetry. Dave Wonderlick wrote something over at Gator Country about that, where, you don't necessarily know what all the players are being offered and things like that, but everybody talks. And so, you know what it's going to take to bring these elite recruits in. From a monetary perspective, you got to go out there and sell, because, the thing I always said when people talked about facilities and dorms and all that stuff was, yeah, I think for a couple of guys that might make a difference. But at the end of the day, recruiters recruit, salesmen sell. You put an engineer in charge of your sales force and you're going to have a lot of problems. And that was kind of what Florida did with Mullen. The promise was that putting Napier in charge was putting a salesman in charge of the sales force. And that's got to convert. I mean, that is the reality. He was brought to Gainesville not only to be the head coach of Florida, not only to win games, but to win on the recruiting trail as well, because that's what's necessary. That's what Florida invested in. All of the money that they put into him and his staff and his army, all of that is tied and pointed towards recruiting. So don't put up a 10th place recruiting finish and then go, well, we need another year. That's what you were brought here for. This is your job. That's the expectation you're being held to. And hey, maybe in his 3rd year, he puts up a top 5 class. That's great. But no one has won the SEC that way. And quite honestly, no one has really improved that much from their 2nd year recruiting to their 3rd year recruiting. When you go look back, the only guy you could say has done that is Jimbo Fisher. And Jimbo's got a pretty decent war chest over there.
All right. Back to being level-headed. It's 2 guys. It's 2 players. It just felt significant with the AJ Harris one in particular. The Jordan Hall one, the reason that one's just a position in need. It's IMG kid, and we're doing okay with IMG. And to lose out to Michigan State's rough. I'm going to compliment Michigan State. They have made a huge investment in their program, and I think they got a $32 million gift from a huge donor up there too. So they're going into Texas. They're swiping 4-star kids away from Texas A&M and Texas too. Michigan State's doing some stuff on the trail to give Sparty some credit, but dadgum, dude.
Well,
tough week for the Gators here.
But that's sort of the point, right? Is that if Michigan State's doing stuff on the trail, what are we doing?
They're making some noise, right? Exactly.
Again, you asked about patience for Napier, and the answer is yes and no. Patience until September to see where the dominoes start to fall. But September 1st, if you're sitting there with an 88 player rating and you haven't filled your areas of need at linebacker and you don't have some elite guys who've committed to you, I'm sorry, you're going to start getting criticized, and you deserve to get criticized. And maybe you have a really strong finish and end up in like the top 7, top 8. But here's the reality is that Florida probably isn't going to beat Texas A&M this year on the recruiting trail. They're probably not going to beat Georgia. They're probably not going to beat Alabama, which means they're going to be 4th in the SEC. And 4th in the SEC has traditionally been somewhere, I think it's like 12th, 8th, 6th, and 5th over the last 4 years when you look at where 4th in the SEC has been. If they end up 5th, I think we go, all right, we can be patient, boost that up a couple of spots, and we're good, right? 12th, I've seen that movie already. I don't want to see it again. And, why make a change if you're just going to play the exact same movie again?
No, I mean, I'm willing to sit back and have faith but you're kind of sitting back and having faith in the process. So I'm calling it faith because it's unseen to this point. There's been a couple. The Kamari Wilson was a nice win. Najee Harris, the IMG thing that makes you really optimistic that there's something different going on under this new regime here. But frustrating week to say the least here, Will.
No, it's a good point, right? Is that, and I'll say the same thing about Kamari Wilson, Najee Harris that I say about AJ Harris, which is that you don't judge a class off of one player, and you don't judge a program and a process off of one player. And so you have to give Napier enough time for his process to play out, but that time is only a couple of months away before the time's up, right? And we need to start seeing results because this is when guys commit. So yes, disappointing week. You want these guys to commit. You'd love to see them be Gators. The staff wanted them. We understand that. However, there's still plenty of other guys out there. And if those guys start committing in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, all of a sudden it looks completely different. All I know is clearly Gator Dave didn't have enough fun on his vacation because he left for vacation and people committed elsewhere. And that's just unacceptable.
Yeah. Good and bad for Gator Dave, I suppose, on that.
All right, let him go on vacation again.
Yeah, let's move on to 4 bits here. We'll talk about Athlon's preseason All SEC team. No Gators on the first team on either offense or defense here. Not a total surprise on that. There's plenty of Gators projected to be in the mix for this, but I could see where I can see where, we even talked about it ourselves. I think we only had a couple of Gators in the mix for the first team anyway. But the second team offense, Osiris Torrance is featured on the offensive line, and Brenton Cox is listed as a linebacker on the second team. Third team, all defense here. Nobody else on the offense outside of Torrance. Third team, all SEC projections. Dexter, Ventrell Miller, and Jason Marshall. So that's pretty much the names we've been throwing around. Here, but nobody willing to take a shot on the Gators on the first team offense or defense from Athlon here.
That's interesting considering that Torrance is projected to be a high-level NFL draft pick. You figure maybe somebody would have taken a shot there. The interesting thing is I think this does sort of suggest the variance in Florida's ability to finish this year. So Bill Sykes wrote a really good article for us probably about a year ago now, looking at all SEC players, and the minimum number of all SEC players on the first and second team that you needed in order to win the SEC was 6. That was the minimum. The average was something like 8.5. But the fact that they've got 6 in the top 4 teams means that with a little bit of luck and some guys taking a step up, it's possible you might be able to get 5 or 6 guys on those first or second team. And that means you're at least second in the East. Right. And that means you're probably winning 10 games. And that means that you're probably having a very good season. You'll notice one of the guys who wasn't on that list was Anthony Richardson. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's a guy that we look at and say, there's a lot of variance there. I mean, you've got people who are putting Richardson in their mock top 10s in the NFL draft, and you've got people who aren't putting him on all SEC lists. And so, there's a huge amount of variance for this team in particular, because nobody really knows what to expect from Napier, and just based on the different player profiles.
Yeah. First team quarterback, Bryce Young, second team, Hendon Hooker, and third team, KJ Jefferson out of Arkansas. So no love for Richardson, and no love for my dark horse preseason Heisman pick, Will Rogers from Mississippi State. Will.
Yeah, well, that's because Will Rogers ain't coming anywhere near the Heisman. That's
dark horse. Dark horse. Didn't say favorite. I took the USC quarterback there. I went with the standard projection, but Caleb Williams probably going to win it. But I like him as an outside shot. Will Rogers going to put up some numbers this year out in Starkville.
Okay, great.
No faith in Mike Leach. No faith in Mike Leach system.
No faith in 6.2 yards per attempt. That's the Will Rogers experience.
He's going to throw it. He's going to throw it 1,000 times, man.
Yeah, that's great. Enjoy the 23 points that they put up against Alabama, LSU, Auburn, and
you got Georgia on the
LSU combined. Too. Oh, great! Yeah. So the 21 points combined.
I'll make a bold preseason prediction. I think Mississippi State's beating one of those big teams on their schedule this year. I think they are.
You're making all these bold predictions where if you're wrong, everybody will be like, yeah, of course he was wrong. Not,
That's why it's called a bold prediction, Will.
not really.
Let's move on to 6-bits. Florida will host Missouri on October 8th, and that it will be the homecoming game. Last year they played Vandy, of course, beat them 42-0 in the last SEC win of the season there. So we got that to remember last year. Those awesome uniforms too. So the Gators will likely be wearing the uniform. There's something throwback against Missouri here. But the last time they hosted Missouri during homecoming was in 2018, and this year's Missouri game will be sandwiched between in a 3-game homestand. They got Eastern Washington just before the Mizzou game and a critical matchup with LSU after. Will, you know how I feel about Eli Drinkwitz and this Missouri Tigers team. I'm not a big Eli guy. I'm hoping we smoke him after last year. So I think that would be a nice homecoming gift to the Gator faithful to beat a Missouri team that it's hard to feel anything about this squad in general. Just don't like Drinkwitz. That's all I got to say on that.
I mean, obviously it's the game that drove Mullen out last year was the loss to Missouri. You hope that the guys who were playing in that game last year remember it and decide to go out and do something about it. The other aspect is the last time they were there for homecoming in 2018, they completely embarrassed Florida. I mean, that was a game where Felipe Franks couldn't complete a pass, and Kyle Trask came in and then broke his foot during practice later that week. I was at that homecoming, or not that homecoming game. Well, yeah, it was homecoming. I was at that homecoming game for Missouri, and was that a miserable experience in 2018. So I'm with you, man. I think Drinkwitz is doing some interesting things there at Missouri. I think Missouri is sort of, if you think about like South Carolina and how they sort of have risen up from time to time, you think about, Kentucky and what they've sort of built there in Lexington, and Missouri is raising its game in some capacity. I don't know that Missouri is ever going to be some giant power, but I think they do have the ability to jump up and bite you every once in a while. But, it's interesting because you mentioned that critical game LSU, and you've got LSU, Georgia, Texas A&M, and then South Carolina all in a row before you play Vanderbilt and Florida State. And in some ways that kind of makes the Missouri game critical, right? Because let's say Florida beats Utah and Kentucky to start the season. Well, now you got South Florida at Tennessee is a tough one, but you maybe get through that initial gauntlet with only one loss. And if you go into the LSU, Georgia, Texas A&M, South Carolina round with only one loss, then it can be a really successful season. If you drop a game to Missouri or you drop a game to Kentucky in that span, well, now all of a sudden you're sort of struggling trying to get to 6 or 7 wins. The interesting thing here, though, is I think that from the standpoint of what Napier is going to try to do and what he wants to do, I think that really does sort of lend itself to being able to beat Missouri. And all of the red zone success that Florida had with Anthony Richardson, they didn't have any of that with Emory Jones, and that was really the problem against Missouri last year. So I don't think anybody thinks Missouri is a better team. But look, I mean, if you want to pinpoint where Dan Mullen really lost the fan base, it was games against Kentucky and games against Missouri.
Yep.
Right. If you beat Missouri, Kentucky, and Tennessee every year, along with South Carolina and Vanderbilt, and you lose to Georgia, you're still going to keep your job. It's the losing to those other teams that really was the issue for Florida. And, look, you're going to lose to LSU every once in a while. You're going to lose to Georgia every once in a while. But until Mullen came to town, we didn't lose to Kentucky. And quite honestly, Missouri and South Carolina, I know one of the things that was really surprising was Florida was 6-6 its last 12 against South Carolina. You put that in the magazine. But you can't lose to South Carolina. Like, those are just games that you got to go 10-2, not 6-6.
We've put up some stinkers against Mizzou too.
Absolutely,
it's like the players know. They're like, there's just no emotional connection to that game. I don't understand it, but it's probably because my theory is I'll never acknowledge Missouri as a part of the SEC. It just feels like a weird game every year.
It's also the good news is this isn't starting at 11 o'clock with no crowd. So, it's going to be a homecoming crowd. It's going to be full. And again, I do think that the lightsaber stuff, even though Mullen's gone, I do think that the players who've been here for that don't like Drinkwitz either. And then, you lose that game last year, and I think everybody was embarrassed by that. And so, if I were Napier, I'd just play that game on a loop the whole week before, maybe 2 weeks before, because you got Eastern Washington the week before that. Just play the game on a loop. Let them see that last play of the game.
Little clip of Eli throwing the hood over and drinking that little Diet Coke as he walks off. Worst. Guy's the worst. All right, let's move on to a dollar here. I can't talk about Missouri anymore. Key SEC games here in 2022. We'll just kind of go week by week and point out a few of our favorites here. Vandy goes to Hawaii on that week 0 game. So if you want to watch your one Vanderbilt game during the season outside of when they play Florida, you got an opportunity to. We'll check in on Barton Simmons and company. Hey, that's September 3rd. We all know about Florida, Utah. I'm not really going to talk about the Florida games here as much because we all know Florida's schedule, but of course you got Florida, Utah that opening weekend. But Cincinnati at Arkansas is a really interesting game. But you got Oregon versus Georgia in Atlanta. Dan Lanning, the Georgia defensive coordinator, going to play Kirby and the Dogs. And then FSU versus LSU in New Orleans, which they made that a neutral site series with Florida State and LSU. Whoever did that was a terrible decision. They're going to play it in Orlando next year, I think. That awful decision on whoever made that. Week 2, you got Alabama at Texas, Tennessee at Pitt, and in week 3, Penn State at Auburn, Miami at Texas A&M are all games that stand out. What do you think about the first 3 weeks of the schedule there?
I think that Oregon-Georgia game is the one that I'm circling. Mainly, I picked Oregon to make the playoffs, and I think
live and die on that pick.
It's kind of an anti-Cristobal pick, to be honest with you. It's that old Bill Simmons Ewing theory that when somebody leaves, all of a sudden everybody gets better. And Cristobal leaves, and all of a sudden Oregon.
I hope that worked for the Knicks.
Well, but here's the deal, right? Is that I think Georgia lost a lot on defense. It's a very early game in the year, and Stetson Bennett's still their quarterback. And while Stetson Bennett did come up big in the second half in that game against Alabama, he's going to have to show me that he can do that over and over and over again.
But do I have to remind you that Bo Nix is Oregon's quarterback?
Likely going I know, but all that really means is that Oregon has a better quarterback than Georgia. So, I think that's a dangerous game. I really do. I think it's early in the season, and Georgia relied heavily on its defense last year. And tell me who the weapons are. Tell me who the guys are that Georgia's going to use. I mean, are we talking Rick Gilbert? Like, is that going to be the guy who's like the breakout star for the Georgia offense? Maybe, but I haven't seen it. The tight end they had last year, what's his name? I can't remember.
Brock Bowers.
I mean, that's a good player, right?
He's NFL ready. Yeah.
And there's no doubt they have a lot of solid players. But the question I have is that when you look at the team last year and how they won on the backs of the defense almost all the time. And when the game gets close, they were basically 1-1, right? Those 2 Alabama games, they were 1-1 in games that were reasonably close. And we'll see. I think there's an opportunity for guys to come up and bite them. There's nobody else in that list that I really look at and go, oh yeah, the SEC's in danger. Maybe the Cincinnati game against Arkansas, because I do think Arkansas is going to take a step back. I think some of their success has been kind of smoke and mirrors the last couple of years. And maybe they take a step back, but if you tell me nationally what's relevant, what's the game I'm watching in those first 3 weeks, it's a non-Florida game. It's Oregon, Georgia. Yeah. Obviously, I want to see how good the Bulldogs are. That's one of the reasons why I'll watch it. But one of the other reasons I'll watch is I think Oregon has a shot. And, there were some games last year where Georgia was playing. We're like, I'm not sure the opposition has a shot. And, the only time I thought that was Alabama. About halfway through the year, we're like, crap, the only way they're going to get knocked out is if Alabama does it. And, almost happened last year, and we'll see what happens this year.
Well, the Ducks got punched in the mouth twice at the end of the season by a more physical Utah team, but we'll see if Dan Lanning has made any adjustments inside that locker room up there in Eugene. Will, I like that Tennessee at Pitt game. I think that's an under the radar. I'll be watching that very closely on September 10th. That was a good game last year in Knoxville. Tennessee gave them a run for their money, but that's going to be let's see Hendon Hooker and Heupel. Let's go see him live up to the hype against the defending ACC champs. Pat Narduzzi, they lost a few guys on that defense, but they've been producing some real solid NFL talent in that Pitt program. And I think Pitt's going to be a pretty tough squad this year. So we'll see how Tennessee does up there. And then Bama at Texas, Miami at A&M, just to get some measuring sticks on Texas and Miami early in the season there will be interesting as well. Let's go next 3 weeks here, September 24th. Arkansas, Texas A&M in Arlington. We saw the Razorbacks pull off an upset last year with A&M not having those quarterbacks, but that would be a big game in deciding whether or not A&M is likely unbeaten heading into that Alabama game on October 1st. You got Alabama at Arkansas, one of the few games on the Alabama schedule that you can maybe circle and say, maybe possible upset. LSU at Auburn, also on October 1st. October 8th, Texas A&M at Alabama, the game of the probably going to be the most overhyped game of the year, but I got it circled on my calendar too. And then Auburn at Georgia, of course, on that October 8th Saturday. Next 3 weeks, Will, how you feeling about them?
I mean, this is where you're getting into the teeth of the schedule, right? I mean, you got LSU versus Auburn, Auburn at Georgia, Texas A&M and Alabama. Those are the traditional rivalries that you look at every Saturday and say, hey, those are the games I'm going to tune in. Those are the 3:30 games, right, that you're listing. I think it's the A&M and Alabama one is obviously the one that everybody's going to be paying attention to for a lot of reasons. And, it's really interesting because I think this is the first time that Nick Saban has had a disadvantage in recruiting. I think he has a disadvantage, Texas A&M, when it comes to NIL, and he hates it. He hates not having a disadvantage, not having an advantage. And I wonder, like, this could go one of two ways. A&M could maybe come in and sort of announce they're here to stay after winning last year, or I think Alabama wins by about 50. And I'm kind of leaning that way. I think Saban's going to put the pedal to the metal. This might be one where at the end of the game you see him call a couple timeouts, a la Urban Meyer, basically announce to Jimbo, "You ain't there yet, man," and spice it up a little bit. Not that it's not spicy enough. And then we all get to see what happens with the post game handshake, which quite honestly might be the most entertaining part. Be like Will Smith and Chris Rock when they go out there. We'll just see which one's Will Smith and which one's Chris Rock.
Last year, Texas A&M, if Calzada, they had a count on him. If Haynes King doesn't go down with that injury, I wonder what that A&M team looked like last year. Looks like going down the stretch. I think they're going to have the quarterback situation at a much higher level this year, game in and game out. So I think that A&M Alabama game could actually be pretty interesting on the 8th. Let's jump to October 15th. Third Saturday in October, Alabama goes to Tennessee, probably a blowout, Will, but if the Vols are feisty this year, this would be a chance to show it. I cheated and I did write LSU at Florida because I do think that's a critical game for both teams on there. And then out of conference, interesting game, Arkansas BYU that same day. October 22nd, big game day there. Ole Miss at LSU. That could be a very entertaining game. Big game for the Tigers too, coming off the Florida. That'll be a tough back-to-back for LSU, right? Florida and Ole Miss. And then, of course, October 29th, Florida, Georgia. Arkansas goes to Auburn, and Ole Miss goes into College Station to face the Aggies.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the Ole Miss LSU game is the one that jumps out there to me. Lane's just sort of been sitting back enjoying all of the stuff that's been going on in the SEC. Like, this is one of the few times where Lane isn't the instigator of all of the drama that's going on, which has kind of been, it's interesting to feel like it's quiet there in Oxford. I'm really curious to see how he replaces Matt Corral and see whether he's got the firepower to keep his offense moving, to keep that sort of just constant offense, keep the fourth down conversions, the analytics, all that sort of stuff. Is he going to be able to keep doing that? Or is he going to have to pull off because he doesn't get the quarterback play that he needs in that particular spot? I tend not to doubt Lane Kiffin when it comes to quarterback play. I think he's probably going to be okay there, which means you're going to have a team that can score a lot. The question will be, can they stop anybody? The good news is when you play LSU, I'm not sure you need to worry about that. It's going to be some weird game regardless of what it is. So I think that one's the one I look at and think that'll be entertaining. The other thing is like you mentioned, you got LSU at Florida the week before that, then Ole Miss at LSU. It's really sort of a proving ground for Brian Kelly. And when you think about Florida fans and what we're going to be looking for, I think a lot of us are going to be looking at Brian Kelly and LSU and saying that's a pretty good comp for Billy Napier. And so if Florida plays LSU close or wins that game, if LSU plays Ole Miss close or even wins that game, now all of a sudden you're sort of looking at LSU saying, how big of a quality win was that? And then obviously you've got Georgia on the horizon and the Texas A&M right after that. So, I think that Ole Miss at LSU is one there in that list that I sort of look at non-Florida and say, I'm really interested to see what happens there.
Don't think there won't be LSU fans who are a lot of angry Monday morning calls in Baton Rouge, Louisiana radio stations if Florida beats LSU this year. Because I think there's a lot of people, I think there's a good chunk of people at LSU who feel like we didn't even give Billy Napier a shot. Like, I think there's a lot of LSU fans looking at that. Although I do think Brian Kelly's done a good job in the transfer portal, and I think the people who are writing him off and writing LSU, I think he'll do a fine job at LSU. And you've had the last two coaches have won national titles, Edo and Les Miles. I think they got a higher level coach than they've had in the last two coaches, and I think they'll be just fine.
I'm just looking forward to when they lose to Florida. We get to hear him in the post-game press conference with a Southern accent. So that's all I'm looking for. He is a higher level coach, but he's also, I think, maybe even, and this is hard to believe, a higher level of weird than some of those guys who've been there before.
Different flavor of weird.
Different guy. He's Boston weird. So. It's a comparison, right? It's going to be the measuring stick. And if LSU's winning national titles 3 or 4 years from now and Florida's struggling, that'll be, we'll all look at that and say, they won. LSU won. If Florida has built the program back and LSU's struggling, then it'll be vice versa. And if they're facing each other for titles, both programs will be happy. And heck, maybe by the time that happens, we won't even be facing each other anymore because Texas and Oklahoma will be in the conference and everything will be all screwy.
Yeah. A quick call back to your comments on Ole Miss. You're obviously, it's going to be very difficult to replace Matt Corral this year, but Jackson Dart coming in at quarterback, pretty high level recruit out at USC, joining Kiffin this year at Ole Miss. You got John Rice Plumlee's moved on to UCF, so he's not there anymore at Ole Miss. So it's pretty much the Jackson Dart show here. And I know they got the kid who filled in the Sugar Bowl. My mind, the name escapes me at the moment here, but he looked like he could be an okay player too. But it probably is going to be Dart and Evans, Zach Evans, the running back from TCU, one-time Georgia commit, I believe, 5-star running back coming in at Ole Miss. That offense should still be fairly explosive in 2022.
Yeah. So it's Altmaier. This is the guy you're talking about. He filled in the Sugar Bowl. Luke Altmaier. So, but yeah, the Ole Miss hire of Lane Kiffin was banking on his ability to make the offense fun and dynamic. And if you think about like Texas A&M with Johnny Manziel, like those weren't the best defenses that A&M had, but because Manziel was able to go out there and just be electric, those teams had a shot to win any week. And that's one of the cool parts about Ole Miss is that when Corral was in charge, they might give up 50. But they might score 55. And so,
and we've seen that a few times.
Absolutely. And having that kind of dynamic offense then does give you the ability to pull some upsets. So you think about that SEC West, you think about who they're going to play, LSU, Alabama, A&M, Arkansas, and Ole Miss might spring a couple upsets in there.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious to see how they look when they play a team like LSU.
They're definitely a tough team. They're definitely a tough out week in and week out. All right, Alabama at LSU on November 5th. That'll be the headline game. That tends to be at that CBS doubleheader day. Florida at Texas A&M, you think's got to have a good chance of being the 3:30 game that day, depending on how the Gators are doing coming off that Georgia game. Tennessee at Georgia that weekend as well. So that's a nice weekend, November 5th right there. November 12th, Alabama goes to Ole Miss, LSU at Arkansas, A&M at Auburn, Georgia at Mississippi State. I told you, Mississippi State's going to pull one big upset this year. Well, one big upset. Maybe Georgia goes to sleep. Late November trip to Knoxville or to Starkville. That's not really a recipe. I wouldn't want to do the cowbells in November if I'm trying to close out a division. November 19th, Ole Miss at Arkansas, Georgia at Kentucky. Weird road trips there back-to-back at Mississippi State and Kentucky for Georgia right there. And, of course, the final week of the season's rivalry week. You got Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Florida at Florida State, Auburn, Alabama, Arkansas, Missouri, Georgia Tech, Georgia, Louisville, Kentucky, LSU, A&M, South Carolina at Clemson to close out the regular season.
How dare you sit there with a straight face and tell me Georgia at Mississippi State, that Starkville's going to be an upset alert, and then give me crap about Oregon and Georgia as I'm sitting there talking about Oregon being.
Does the Oregon have we not learned by watching Alabama play in these opening games what Georgia's going to do to Oregon on opening day though?
We'll see,
have
man.
We not learned.
Look, you might have learned, but to then turn around and tell me that Mississippi State and Will Rogers is going to beat Georgia. Come on, don't give me that crap.
Just put some good juju out there for the right Bulldogs on that.
No juju for Mississippi State. They might go 2-10 this year. With you picking them, they might be 0-12. So the one in there I'd really look at is A&M and Auburn. You mentioned the quarterback play, the better quarterback play that you expect from A&M this year. That really is going to be the key. The defense last year was pretty salty. The offense not great. And, if Max Johnson is the quarterback when they're playing Auburn, that's bad, right? They need somebody to step in who's not Max Johnson to be the quarterback there at A&M in order to be successful. And I think this is sort of a measuring stick for that, right? Harson's struggling. You're getting later in the year. This might be a game where Auburn is either fighting for his job or they've already decided to move on and they've made a decision. And so, the team's sort of out there playing out the string. You just really don't know. But that's the one where I'm sitting there going, out of all the teams in the SEC West that have talent levels that can compete with A&M, but A&M might overlook, it's also on the road. That's the one I'd sort of look at in that bunch and say, this is an area where, hey, maybe A&M beats Alabama earlier in the year, but loses another game somewhere along the way, and they're both sitting there with one SEC loss. And then this is one where Auburn comes up, sort of snake bites A&M, and now all of a sudden Alabama slides in front and is still able to make the SEC championship game, even if they happen to lose one earlier in the year.
I'm not high on South Carolina this year, despite they did a good job in the transfer portal as well. Just felt like a few things fell their way for them to barely get above 500 last year, and that it could be a potential just slight step back here with Frank Beamer in year 2. But Gamecocks go to Clemson, just because we didn't talk about the Gamecocks much here. Will Gamecocks go to Clemson? How do you feel about Clemson bouncing back this year? I know we're diving into outside the SEC there, but South Carolina, do you feel like there's a chance that with Beamer bringing in some higher level offensive talent, that there's a chance for an upset this year over the Tigers?
Nah, I don't think so. I mean, you got Uiagalelei there at Clemson, who had a rough year last year, but you figure he's going to step forward, and they're going to bring in competition to make sure that he steps forward if he can't, right? Mm-hmm. And Clemson's offense has always been predicated for more than a decade now on high level quarterback play. You go to Lawrence, and then you go back to Deshaun Watson, and then you go back to Taj Boyd. Like, they've had a real string of elite quarterbacks. And if Uiagalelei isn't that guy, then they're going to bring in somebody else to do it. And I'm sure they have the guy in the pipeline to be able to do that as well. I think, really what it comes down to for me is, what do you think about Spencer Rattler? And Rattler just sort of fell apart with Oklahoma last year. And he was okay his freshman year. I mean, that Florida team that he played in the Cotton Bowl, he obviously looked fantastic against them, but I'm pretty sure a peewee quarterback would have looked good against Florida in that game. I mean, I think Oklahoma ran for over 300 yards in that game and just, blew Florida off the ball. It's easy to be a quarterback when your offense is running the ball 10 yards pop. I think, you look at that freshman year, it was good, but not spectacular. And then you look at his sophomore year, you go, that wasn't great. So what's South Carolina getting? I mean, they're getting a talented guy, but is that talent, you made fun of me for Nick's going to Oregon, but it's kind of the same thing with Rattler going to South Carolina, right? If he was really that good, he would have been able to stay at Oklahoma and beat out guys like Dylan Gabriel. Instead, he comes over to South Carolina where the path is sort of smooth for him to take over the starting role. But he got beat out by Caleb Williams last year for a reason. Now, Williams is a good player, but he got beat out by him. And so we'll see, right? I mean, again, I think high profile guy, but so is a guy like Bo Nix. So is a guy like Jake Locker. Like, there's a lot of guys who are high profile who don't work out. And I think I've sort of shown in some of my writing previously that has a lot to do with completion percentage and going down the field in high school. You can sort of project that. Where Rattler is, I don't necessarily know, but the first couple of years, he hasn't shown me something that says, yeah, he's going to be an elite guy. Maybe he turns into that guy, but I'm not going to predict it based on what I've seen so far.
All right. And we have not dove too deeply into the Kentucky Wildcats this week, because next week we'll do a little gambling episode here where we go over preseason odds, preseason picks here. And there's some love for the Kentucky Wildcats in the preseason this year. Heard it talk about with Will Levis too. Some mock drafts having him going number 1 at quarterback. We'll discuss that next week, though. We'll save that one. We'll dive into that one on next week's episode. In the meantime, you got any final words to close out?
No, just really appreciate everybody supporting us for the magazine.
Yes.
We know the content's been a little bit slow over the last couple of weeks. We just want to say thank you. We've met the goal that we had at the beginning. We've actually sold past the goal that we thought, but that doesn't mean you should stop buying it. So if you want to buy it, go over to readandreaction.com/mag and help support us over there. We're in talks actually with some folks about potentially putting it down and making it a paper copy next year. So, one of the ways we can do that is having numbers that gets people excited about having it as a paper copy. So if you want to help us out, go over there, readandreaction.com/mag. Pick it up. It's got a lot of good information in it, over 150 pages, Gator specific preview for the season. And like I said, everybody who's bought it already, thank you. It's awesome to put something out there and get that kind of reception.
Yeah, to echo what Will said, thank you to everybody out there. We really appreciate y'all's support. Have a great week, and go Gators.
Go Gators.
Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel, join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week, and check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles, and as always, go Gators.